Hello, on this video I'm going to be doing the 5,000 mile maintenance PM on my 2016 Harley-Davidson Road King. Now the best way to do this is go ahead and completely wash and wax your bike before you even get started. I took the panniers off, or the saddlebags, to do that. Got everything cleaned, washed and waxed. I have a blanket on the floor, and I'm going to take the pannier off for the left side and set it on a blanket so it doesn't get scratched or damaged. And then I'm going to show you how to check the belt tension and the air ride shocks. Okay, to take off your saddlebag, you're just simply going to open it up and support it with your leg or foot and unclip these two clips. Close it back up, and then you can carefully take it out and set it aside, and that'll let you have access to check the belt tension down here and for the air pressure adjustment right here for your shocks. So I'm going to get a couple things out and I'll come right back. Okay, to check your air shock pressure, you're going to use hopefully a Harley-Davidson pump. It has a gauge built in and is made specifically for this purpose. You don't want to use a regular air pump like at a commercial gas station or whatever, because it'll blow this up. I've had two people blow their shock absorbers up by using the wrong thing. So you're simply going to take the Schrader valve cap off, screw this on, and then in your manual, it's going to tell you, based upon how many people or how much load you're carrying, what pressure you want this at. And I keep mine around 20 PSI. So I'm a little below that right now. I'll pump it up a little bit to 20, unscrew this, and then I'll put the cap back on, and that takes care of that. To check your belt tension, you have to have the bike in neutral, and there's a gauge built in here, and you're going to take the special belt tension meter, either a Harley-Davidson one or an aftermarket one, and you're going to push it up until you reach the number 10 on the gauge, and then you look at the amount of deflection, and in my case it deflects about 3.5, 4 of these marks. And so that's between 10 and 15 millimeters, which it should be. In the manual, it gives you the exact specifics. I think it's like 14.7 millimeters max. But anyway, that shows you your deflection. And in my case, I don't have to do anything to the belt. It's just the way it left the factory. So no adjustments are required, so that's great. The next thing on the checklist to check is the front and rear tire pressures and also the tread wear. I've only got 5,000 miles. I don't see anything unusual on the tread wear. To check the tire pressures, you want to do it with the tires cold. You want to use a good gauge like this that's very accurate. And on mine, it's 36 front and 40 for the rear. And it's easiest if you take the rear panniers off to get to the valve stem. So I don't need to show you that, because that's something you should be doing every 2 to 4 weeks anyway. Okay, in the manual it calls for checking and lubricating your levers. Now to lubricate them, you have to pull this pin out. There's a E-ring on the bottom, or C-clip, and then you're going to pull this out and lubricate it with some Harley-Davidson lubricant. At 5,000 miles, I'm just checking these. They're smooth action. There's no problems. They're not squeaking or anything, and so I'm not going to bother with them until at least 10,000 miles. So, but that's how you do it. You take these out and use some special Harley-Davidson lubricant to lube those levers. Also, the Jiffy stand, they say to check it and lubricate it. Again, only 5,000 miles. It doesn't need it yet, because to do it the proper way, you have to have the bike on a stand, and you have to take the Jiffy stand off and lubricate it by cleaning it and putting it back together. And I'll show you some pictures of that, and I'll explain what I'm talking about. Okay, to lubricate the Jiffy stand, you actually have to take this bolt off that's at the top and take this little cast assembly off, and there's some washers and everything, and then you're going to pull the Jiffy stand out from the bottom by moving it forward, and then clean it and put some new lubricant on it. That's best done, in my opinion, at the dealer. When I get the tires changed at like 10,000 miles, I'll have them do the Jiffy stand at that same time as well, because I don't have a stand for my motorcycle I can put it on. So I'm just going to skip it for the 5,000 mile maintenance PM, because again, it's a new bike and everything's fine, so no sense in taking it apart. If you have a cable actuated clutch instead of the hydraulic one, you're going to have a cable and you're going to have this little accordion type thing that goes over the adjustments for the cable. To adjust the clutch, all you do is slide this back and there's some jam nuts that you loosen up and you can adjust the cable accordingly. I've already adjusted mine and I'll talk about that here in a second. I'll show you how I have mine actuated. I've adjusted my clutch as follows. I'll explain it. So I have a little bit of play here, about that much. And when I pull in the clutch all the way, it completely disengages the clutch so I can put it into gear and there's no tendency to drag or pull the bike forward. You can tell it's fully disengaged. And when I release it, of course, the gear is fully engaged. And I have play in here because what I found is if you don't have enough play, when you switched into like fourth or fifth or sixth gear, it tends to slip a little bit. So you don't want that to happen. So again, you have to just adjust it little by little until you find the magic area between engaged and disengaged. And I've gotten that all done, and you do it by adjusting it like I showed you at that little area where the accordion is. The checklist calls for checking all of your switch functions. Well, if you ride the bike normally, you have automatically checked all your switch functions because you use your turn signals, horn, and everything else on a regular basis. So I don't need to check any of that. Everything is fine, including the passing light switch and all that. So that's good. Also, you want to check your front brake reservoir to make sure you have fluid in it. I'll have that changed, or I'll change it myself at some point in the future, but not at 5,000 miles. So the sight window's here and my reservoir is full, so that's all good. I'll check my rear reservoir next. On your right side of your bike is your rear reservoir, which is right here. The sight window's in this spot. And there's a bubble in there because the bike's on its side, so that's not a problem. But everything's actuating okay. And also when you're checking your front and rear wheels for tire pressure, you also want to check the brake pads to make sure they're not worn or anything, which would be extremely unusual at 5,000 miles. Okay, one of the last things on the checklist to do is to check all of your lines, like your clutch cable, your brake lines, hoses, to make sure nothing's got abrasion on it or wear. I've already gone over all that. When I washed it, I checked to make sure everything was really good, make sure all my oil cooler lines are good, all that stuff. So really, everything is pretty much done for the 5,000 mile PM. There's really nothing to do except to change the oil, which I'm going to do next. But it also calls for checking the air filter element. I see no reason to check that at 5,000 miles. There's not a good reason for that. So I'm just going to leave that alone. And the reason I say that is because every time you take something apart on a Harley, because they shake and vibrate so much, you have to use either the correct kind of nuts and bolts that are one use only, or you have to use Loctite. And I don't want to be taking things apart that are working fine just for inspection purposes when there's really no need. You know if something's wrong. Okay, now we come to the actual part of the 5,000 mile PM that you have to do, and that's the oil change. Everything else, as far as I'm concerned, is, as I mentioned earlier, is an inspection, because Harley does a great job of putting these things together. And I've found after owning several Harleys that if you start taking stuff apart, it starts falling off later because of the fact that they use a lot of one-time use hardware. So for this oil change, I'm going to try this Pro Plus oil. It's 20W50. It's full synthetic. Harley recommends using their oil, which is a non-full synthetic. It's, I think, called Syn 3, and it's mostly synthetic, and they think that this actually has too much lubrosity. I'm going to try a K&N oil filter, a KN 171C. It's chrome. But to get the old Harley filter off, I'm going to have to use the Harley-Davidson special filter wrench. And so we'll do that here in a second. Okay, the Harley filter wrench has a special cutout in it so that you can fit it over the filter, which I have right now. And I have a ratchet on it, so I'm ready to take it loose. What I'm going to do is just barely loosen it. And then while I sit on the bike, we're going to take the filter off and let the oil just drip straight down into an oil pan. Now, I've tried using some of the Harley accessories you can buy that supposedly direct the oil out from the filter and keep it from dripping, but I found no matter what you do, it just seems to drip, and you have to clean it all up with some wipes and some, I use some alcohol to clean up all the old residual oil. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then we'll start working on changing the oil itself. The K&N filter has a 17 millimeter nut on the top of it, which I really love this idea. I use K&N filters for a lot of different applications. So you're going to take a 17 millimeter socket and your ratchet, and what you're going to do is I put a black mark on the filter itself when it just barely started to touch, and then you turn it 3/4 to 1 turn to get it tight. Well, you kind of have to have a feel for it. So I made it nice and snug, not super duper tight, but nice and snug. And when I run it, we'll check to make sure everything's okay. After I run it for a few minutes and it cools down, I'll come back and recheck it for being tight. Now I'm going to pull the drain plug. I'll show you where that is here in a second, and we'll go ahead and drain the oil. This is your engine oil sump, and this is the drain plug for it. You don't want to pull this plug out, and your transmission plug's under here, so you don't want to mess with that. Only this one here, and it has a torque setting of I think 14 to 20 foot-pounds. I'll check that when I come back and get ready to put it in. And it has an O-ring on it, so what you want to do is make sure the O-ring's in good shape once you take it off and when you get ready to reinstall it. So I'm going to go ahead and take this plug out, let the oil drain, and then we'll come back and put the drain plug back in and torque it up. All right, the oil's drained now, so I'm going to put the plug back in. You're going to use a 5/8 socket to put it in. And then I've set my torque wrench for 18 foot-pounds. The spec is 14 to 21 foot-pounds of torque. I don't really want to torque it too tight. So 18 should be a good in-the-middle number. So I'm just going to hand snug this up, and I checked the O-ring to make sure it was good. I cleaned the magnet and made sure there was not a bunch of metal filings on it. There was just very little, which I would expect in a fairly new engine. And so again, I'm going to torque it on, and then we'll put the oil in. All right, my drain plug's in, it's torqued down. I'm ready to add the oil. It goes right in here into where the dipstick or oil check hole is. So I'm going to put in exactly 1 gallon, because this engine holds exactly 1 gallon of oil. So I'll get that done. I'm going to put the screw in the top, and then we'll run it for a minute and make sure there's no leaks. And then we'll go back and just recheck everything over. All right, the oil's in, 1 gallon. I put the dipstick back in. Now I'm ready to go ahead and start it and let it run for a minute and make sure there's no leaks, especially around the oil filter or whatever. It's the first time I've used a K&N on a Harley. So we'll go ahead and start it, see what happens. Oil light went out, that's a good sign. So I'm going to let it run for 5 minutes or so, and then I'm going to make sure there's no leaks. And that's all there is to this video. Really working on Harleys is really, really easy. And don't forget to recycle your used oil. Thank you for watching.